Gary Frey, welcome to the Real Clear Values podcast.
Thank you. Good to be on here, Tom.
Gary, you are the author of Silence the Imposter, 7 Weapons to Silence Imposter Syndrome. And imposter syndrome is something that a lot of people have been struggling with. I think you identified in the book that originally it was thought that high achieving women suffered from it particularly,
Yes.
but then it's since been identified that pretty much everybody suffers with it to
Yeah.
a greater or lesser extent. So this is really topical. It's really relevant. It's just part of the human experience to struggle with the
Yeah.
imposter, it seems. So what was it that inspired you to write this book? Because going through the book, I know that you were wrestling about, does the world need another book? Should I write a book? So
Yes.
what was it that inspired you to write this particularly?
Yeah. This one in particular, I always thought if I was going to write a book, it was going to be called Sleeping with a Rhino, because when I discovered my partner's embezzlement, it was one of the most traumatic experiences I'd ever been through. And there were some potential dangerous things about that because of the way our insurance was structured and what I caught him doing, which was terrifying. But I didn't ever write that book. And he's passed away since then. And I thought, I don't know that it's even worth writing that, because I've been through stuff that was far more terrifying than that. So I don't know. But it was when a woman that I was coaching, who had 10,000 employees at the time, now she's got 12,000, but she said, Gary, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like, what? She is one of the most amazing entrepreneurs and CEOs I've ever known. And I've worked with some amazing ones. And I said, Tana, why would you say that? And she said, I only have a 2-year secretarial degree. And I'm like, And it was shortly thereafter that I realized, wait. There's a pattern here. Almost every CEO that I've either coached or worked for or that's confided in me, and like I said, I've had some pretty amazing ones that I've gotten to work with, they have all struggled with this feeling of, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm in over my head. If people just knew this or that about me, they compare what they think a CEO looks like, and then they know themselves well enough, and they're like, well, I don't really fit that. But so that comparison trap gets us into trouble. And that's when I realized, wait a minute, this this needs to be talked about, because that was part of my struggle from the time I was probably 10 years old on. And when I was 10 years old, that would have been 1972. And this this term imposter syndrome wasn't coined until like 1978 by two female psychologists that saw this behavior, or they actually, it's not a behavior, it's really why they call it a syndrome, I don't know, because it's not a medical thing, it's a mindset thing. But they saw this among high achieving female clients that they had, these psychologists, and they were these doubts, these feelings of less than, feeling like, man, I'm in way over my head. If people just knew this, that I didn't know what I'm doing, what am I doing? And it's very lonely when you're running a company. So it just exacerbates it, I think. Now, what I've found since then, this has been really interesting. A friend of mine who's written 2 books, actually, he's paid a ghostwriter to write both of his books. And I don't think he's even read either one of them, honestly. And he has a library that's far bigger than mine. Um, and I said, Andy, have you read any of those books? And he said, no, I go to Chat GPT and I have him do a 1-page summary and I put it in the book. But he's read mine twice, which is really mind blowing. But he said, he sends me a text. He's in California. And he says, my daughter was home from Princeton. And this guy is very educated, and all of his kids are. And he says, my daughter's home from Princeton. She goes into my library and she pulls your book out of all of the books in there. And mine is one of the thinnest. I mean, it's not a very thick book. And she says, Dad, can I borrow this book? And he says, yeah, but why that one? And she said, well, because this was the topic, imposter syndrome, for our orientation at Princeton. Think about that. And he said, "Really? Why? Like, why?" And she said, "Because you have all these kids coming in that were top of their class or whatever in their high schools, and then they get here and they're thinking, whoa, 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 I'm in way out, way over my skis. I don't know what I'm doing."
Mm.
That whole thing. And I think what's happened is the social media phenomenon that has blown up, and Instagram and TikTok and whatever, we, especially Instagram, we see everybody else's show reels and we compare all that stuff, that carefully curated, perfectly manicured photo, and we compare that with what we know is our reality, and there's a discrepancy. And
Yeah.
so we think, oh, and I think it may be subconsciously, oh, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the
Mm.
way it is for everybody else. But we know our reality doesn't match that. And I think that just has added fuel to the fire.
Yeah, absolutely. There is on social media, there's the presentation of the persona, but then
Yeah.
there's the shadow isn't seen. So the shadow remains unseen, but we know something of our own shadows. We know something of our own struggles, of the things that we
Yes.
don't present on social media, but then we don't always translate that into our perception of others, i.e., we don't always think, well, okay,
Yes.
great, this is their presentation, but that isn't the full picture. We don't always acknowledge that. And it's like the problem of comparison as well. You talk about the issue of comparison, comparing yourself to other people, and I think that might be in your wither column. We'll talk about
Yes. Yeah.
the thrive wither column, but that idea of comparison with other people, and especially when you've got these metrics on social media as well, like number of followers, number of likes,
Yeah.
number of
Yes.
comments, and everything else, it's really quite difficult for people who in their own minds have gamified that, and they
Yeah.
think of that as being a metric of value, and
Yeah.
they use that as a measure of their worth or the perception of their worth in the social milieu, whatever that milieu is, right? It's not necessarily society at large. It
Yes.
could be in the school, in the college, even in the workplace or whatever it is. And that can, I think that can, for some people, I think that can bring about some degree of shame. So on that
Yes.
regard, Gary, I think starting off with this, so you talk about, so the subtitle of your book is Seven Weapons to Silence the Imposter Syndrome. This leads us on nicely into weapon number one. So tell us about weapon number one, the first starting point, so to speak, the very first point at which you're able to silence the imposter. What is that?
It is so simple. I mean, it's almost embarrassing how simple these weapons are. And I used the word weapon on purpose. I was raised as a pacifist. First of all, you got to know that, which is, I think, is interesting. And I actually do have a shotgun. So, but I was raised as a pacifist, and we were kind of taught like, oh no, everything, kumbaya, everybody should get along. Well, they should, but they don't. And and I learned at a very late age. It wasn't until I was in my 40s that I realized a bully only understands one thing, and that's getting a quick sucker punch to the nose. I mean, it's just embarrassing that it took me that long. And it was only because I had a colleague that worked for me. Um, and we were on a conference call with a guy that had retired from a large, very well known company. And he was used to barking out orders and ordering people around. And he bullied my colleague, and he brought her to tears on this conference call. And it was at that moment, because if he would have done it to me, I would have just taken it because of how I was raised. But with that, and I see her tearing up, I said, enough. This conference call is over. We're done. And he was like, what, and back up, And it was then that I realized, wait a minute, a bully only understands, a counterpunch. And so that's how I feel about imposter syndrome. It's a bully. It's a mental bully that needs to be silenced. So I call it weapons. And the first weapon, which is so simple, is just realize you're not alone. How many times do we think, oh, we're the only ones that are going through this or that, and then we suffer in silence? And then the bully has his way. We get thrown into an isolation chamber where all we can hear are the echoes of the imposter. That's it. Like you're the only one. And it's just not true. I mean, they say conservatively 70% of the population deals with this. And I've heard other people say, I think I even heard Dr. Phil say recently, the vast majority of the population, like over 80%, deal with it. So I figure, well, I'm going to just be conservative. Let's say 70. It's still an overwhelming majority. And just to realize, I mean, think about the times where you've gone through dark moments, depression, doubt, etc. And then think about a time when somebody has actually kind of texted you or called you or sat down and put their arm around you. And they may not have been able to do one doggone thing about your situation, but to just know that they cared. Massive, massive.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
it's huge.
weapon one.
It's huge, isn't it? There is a lot of truth to that saying that there's strength in numbers. And strength in numbers, even if it's just moral strength or
Yes.
a feeling, like you say, that there's nothing that the other person can do. You have to step into the arena on your own. But knowing that somebody else has been there, has come through it, has overcome it, and it's somebody that you know as well, that can give you a lot of comfort. It can give you a lot of strength in knowing that there is a way forward, knowing that there is a way through. So I think that idea of, starting off, actually, this is normal. This is not some, you're not
Yeah.
broken. There's nothing wrong with you. Because I think sometimes we
Yes.
writ large have this fear that there's something wrong with us. Oh, it's just me. It's just
Yeah.
the way I am. It's just my personality. It's just how I am. It's whether it's how I was raised or whether it was this or whether it was
Yeah.
that. And actually, no, this is reality. This is being a human being. This idea of having to
Yes.
overcome this imposter syndrome, this fear of not being enough, this fear of being found out.
Yes.
It's a very, very real thing. So the second one, am I right in thinking that the second one is the big one?
Well, Thrive Wither, this T chart, and it's not strengths and weaknesses. We've all done strengths and weaknesses assessments if we're, past the age of 30, probably. And hopefully anybody in their 20s has done it. But it is really what makes you come alive versus what makes you wither. And it's so simple. I mean, it's again, this is it's embarrassingly simple, but a necessity facilitated me to actually create it. And I'm sure Solomon created it, and he probably even said, hey, there's nothing new under the sun, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. So I'm sure somebody else did it. And it probably wasn't called Thrive Wither. Who knows? Maybe it was. But this simple T chart of what made me come alive and what makes me wither, the reason it's such a powerful weapon is I've seen companies get transformed just by looking at their talent pool and the starting with the leaders on down of identifying what you love to do versus what you loathe doing. That's how Marcus Buckingham would call it in Standout 2.0. When I saw his methodology, and he was one of the guys that founded StrengthsFinder. When I saw love and loathe, I'm like, hey, that's Thrive and Wither. It's the same basic concept. But when you focus on getting people into the stuff that really makes their motor turn versus what drains their battery, then all of a sudden you really can accelerate. And what happens is the way it happens with individuals is, think about a time when you have just been in the zone, like, high flow state, and you're loving what you're doing. You could be hearing, "Tommy, come for dinner, come, Tom," and you're just like, you're not. It's not that your ears are damaged. You are just so focused, and you're loving what you're doing that they have to come in and, like, almost pop you upside the head to just get your attention. Well, that's the same thing that happens when we're in our thrive zones. And not all of life is that way. I mean, there isn't a job that doesn't require you to do something that you don't enjoy doing, but you don't want to have too much of it, because then when you're outside of that, when you're in your state, when you're in your thrive zones, it's kind of like when your mom's calling for dinner, but you can't hear because you're just enjoying what you're doing. The same thing. If you're really alive in what you're doing, you're not comparing yourself to everybody else. You're not thinking, "Oh, I'm not good enough," or whatever, right? So that's why that weapon is so powerful. And again, I've seen entire management teams realign themselves. Here's a CEO that and I don't think I mentioned this in the book, but it was one of the most powerful reminders of how transformative this exercise can be. This CEO I was coaching was just so over, like, he was just drained by his own company. He got to a point where he hated his own company. Had about 125 people working for him at the time. But so we did Thrive Wither, and then we did a function accountability chart with him and his management team on an offsite. And I said, "All right, I want you to just list all the functions of this company, like, accounts payable, accounts receivable, IT, HR, marketing, sales, operations, et cetera, et cetera." And they listed out 14 key functions in their company. And I said, "All right, I want you to put the responsible party for, like, where's the buck stop in each one of these functions." Well, to my surprise, the CEO and the founder had his name by 11 of the 14. Oh man, no wonder you hate life. So I said, "Okay, time out. This is the problem." So I said, "I want you to focus. I want you to go up to this." So we had a big flip chart up on the wall. And I said, "I want you to just circle any of those, if any, you actually love doing, that, like, make your motor turn." And he circled 3. Now, founder of this erosion control company, soil erosion control, he loved working with his laborers. A lot of immigrants and, like, hard labor. He loved working with them. Well, that's not typically what you think. Oh, that's a CEO role, but that's what he loves to do. Okay, cool. Circle it. He loves inventing stuff. He barely finished high school, and but he's very bright, and he found better ways and inventing machinery and other things that could make their jobs better and more perfect and uniform, like, completely game changer. All right, circle that. So that was R&D. And then he had one in sales where he liked working with key accounts. So he worked with large home builders, and he liked working with some of those guys. I said, "Okay, cool." Well, that isn't what you typically think of. Oh, that's what a CEO does. You think that they came from finance, you think that they came from whatever, but not working with laborers and inventing stuff in the back room, and then going and working with key accounts. But that's what he loved to do. I said, "All right, cool. We got to shed these other 8 things off of your plate." All right, we go around the room. "Hey, anybody love to do these things?" Well, the CFO, COO said, "Oh, I would love," and I think it was about 4 of those things. "Oh, okay, cool." And I said, "You would actually love to do those?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, that's right in my thrive zone." Oh, isn't that interesting? The CEO's wither zones were somebody else's thrive zones. And then we found another couple, but I think we had 3 that we hadn't found a home for among the management team yet at that point. So I said to the CEO, "Hey, you okay if you start transitioning and training these other folks in these other responsibilities?" And he goes, "Yeah." And literally within just a few months, I saw him, and his wife was going through some really terrifying medical stuff, and they had adopted a special needs kid that was really having trouble. So it wasn't like home life was just, roses and caviar. So um, I said, "Man, you seem like you're doing well." Like there was just a lightness about him. And he goes, "Man, I can't wait to go to work every day." Hmm. But he was hiding behind that. The imposter was saying, well, a CEO is supposed to do all these things, at least in his mind.
Mm,
Says who? Says who?
yeah.
That's why that weapon in particular, I think, is extremely powerful.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant, and you laugh about how simple it is. But I think isn't that just the case though with so many I think about some of the tools that I use in my mentoring. And
Yeah.
yes, it's very simple stuff. I've not seen it in that exact iteration before, but there's plenty of other ways of getting to the question
Yes.
and also getting to the answer. But principles generally are simple. I think it's that
Yeah.
we need the reminders as well. So it's
Yeah.
knowing and actually knowing. We can know stuff because we can learn from books, but
Yeah.
putting these things into practice and also having the time and space to step back and reflect on these things
Yes.
is really powerful as well. And who does that? How many people do that? We had that sort of imposed upon us during the pandemic. We had this time and
Yes.
space imposed upon us where, okay, well, everything's stopping now, or more or less everything is stopping now, so you can reflect. And I think some people use that time very, very well, and they did a lot of self-discovery and made leaps and
Yeah.
bounds in their own development. And maybe others didn't do that so much, and maybe it was a squandered opportunity. I don't know, but I think the point is
Yes.
that these things are always simple, and I love how simple your framework is. The thrive with two columns, because
Yeah.
I'm thinking about this myself on the back of your book and thinking this would be a good exercise for me to do because
Yes. Yes.
even in I've got a lot of interests, a lot of things I'm interested in life, and I can't
Yes.
satisfy all of those interests all at the same
Right.
time. But even in the things that I am interested in, I could pick out these are the things that make me thrive. These are things where I get a bit smaller and I wither. And I don't want to thrive in them either. I don't have a desire to, and I don't
Yes.
need to. There's no need for me to develop those things because that's the thing. There's an element of opportunity cost, isn't there? If I start to develop myself in this area, then I'm not going to develop myself in that area. And maybe I don't need to be developing myself in that way at all. So I think it really helps you to get some sort of pathway forward, doesn't it? It helps you to make a plan,
Yes.
essentially. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. A lot of people struggle with where do I start? It's that idea of where do I start? I want this sort of purpose, I want this vision, but where do I start? And I think you're giving people something that
Yeah.
helps them to find a place to start, to find a way to go. Having said that, however, you do quote in your book, and this relates to the story of your life that you tell in the book. I planned, God laughed. So so maybe we have to be careful
Yeah.
about how many plans we do make. Yeah, we can have a general
Yes.
trajectory, a general pathway, but then there are all these circumstances that come into play as well. So we have to be careful not to hold on too tight to our plans, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. That's a great place to start, because I did that first iteration of my Thrive Wither in 1993 when I first discovered my partner's embezzlement, and then he said he was going to come clean, and then I caught him again in 1994. Um, but I hadn't defined my purpose until 2003, so 10 years later. And that was when I read Rick Warren's book, purpose-driven life. And that, for the first time, I read that book 3 times, and I don't read a lot of books more than once. Um, but I got really serious even that first time. I wrote down, like, I went through the exercises dutifully. And most books that have exercises, I don't like doing that. I don't know why, but I didn't. But in this one, I did. And it really gelled for me. And I had more life experience by that point anyway, where it was much easier. I think it's an iterative process. Um, it takes us a while to kind of figure that out, what really lights us up. But this is a really good first step. And so I encourage kids, high school, even before that. My oldest grandson is in middle school now. And man, I see the peer pressure, that those guys, and the pressure to conform. And I felt it, before we had cell phones and we had television sets that had 3 channels plus a public one, and barely fuzzy, it's fuzzy anyway at that point. So we felt it back then. And I'm sure that, thousands of years ago, they probably felt it too. I don't know. But I think that's a good place because we were all created unique. We were all, like, our thumbprints prove it. And I'm very passionate about that. We were not, like, there's intelligent design behind each one of us. And I believe that to my core. And so part of the gift of life is discovering what it is that makes us tick and what makes us unique, and where do we fit in part of this bigger mosaic, because it's much bigger than any of us.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying about the 14 things that the CEO was, well, the CEO was, there were 14 things in the business did, these core functions, and the
Yeah.
CEO, the book stopped with the CEO on 11 of them. But then actually,
Yes.
when you broke it down, what's really interesting, things that he withered in, there were other people that were picking off these things left, right, and center, and that goes to your
Yes.
point about the uniqueness. So things that there's things that I just really don't like doing, that just don't find any, I
Yes.
don't derive any sort of enjoyment from them or any sense of fulfillment. And then there are other things that I absolutely love doing, and and that would be the same for other people. So other people, I'd say, oh, well, I really I enjoy public speaking. I really enjoy public speaking. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy mentoring. I enjoy that
Yes.
sort of thing. Some people would be terrified by that. They'd be terrified to get on a stage. They'd be
Yes.
terrified to be in front of other people, and they'd rather do something that's really, really task oriented, that's
Yes.
individual, that's private, that's crunching numbers. For me,
Yes.
I would definitely wither if I was doing that all day. I need the
We do.
interaction, I need the energy. And that's fine. That's exactly how it's supposed to be, because we're here to help each other, but we need each other. So we need the people who crunch the numbers. We need the people who are the teachers
Yes.
and who speak and communicate to larger groups. So we are all unique and we all need each other. I was going to say, actually, Gary, I'll mention it now because you've alluded to this. But one thing that's interesting to me about the book itself, because as I've interpreted it, the book is pretty much separated into two halves. So you've got
Yeah.
the first half is the practical. Here's your 7 weapons, basically. And if all you want is the
Yeah.
7 weapons, I'll give you the 7 weapons. You can take
Yeah.
them, you can apply them, you can use them, you can go away, and you're good to go. And the second half is your story. And I feel that there is a thread throughout the whole book, which is a thread of faith.
Yeah.
And you don't shy away from that at all. You're very open about your faith
Yeah.
and how that provides value to you and how it
Yeah.
enriches your life as well. And that is, I think that is to be commended, because I think a lot of people shy away from that, especially
Yeah.
in this day and age. People are worried
Yes.
about, oh, shall not say this or shall not
Yeah.
say that. Well, it's your book, it's you, you're communicating yourself, your values,
Yeah.
you're giving credit where credit's due, and all the rest of it. So you do that very well. I like at the start of the book, and I think that this faith thread, if you like, or your grounding in faith,
Yes.
very much relates to something you say at the start of the book. And I'm going to paraphrase it. It's something to the effect of, and you got this, I believe you're quoting somebody else, something to the effect of, your greatest suffering is your greatest opportunity to
Oh,
serve others, or something
yeah.
to that
Yeah.
to that effect. Now, I've got, so one of my frameworks, I've got a framework which is basically based on that very idea that actually to find
Yes.
meaning in suffering, you can find meaning in suffering through understanding what you're learning and what you're experiencing and what you're gaining from this thing, and then how you can use that thing to create something in order
Yes.
to serve other people. So it's a very similar idea, but you're getting that from your experience as well. And I have to say, listening to your story, I thought it was just the thing about you having to move across the country, and or choosing to move across the country. Because again, going back to faith, when I heard you say you decided to move across the country because your business partner had been embezzling money, there was all this impropriety that was going on, and
Yes.
you could have just outed him, but you
Yes.
chose not to do that because it would have destroyed his reputation and maybe his life.
Yes.
And then obviously you didn't want to raise questions about your own integrity by moving over the road and doing your own thing.
Yes.
But a lot of people, so again, I know I'm rambling a bit here about the faith side of things, but I think this is really important because we've got these threads that are coming through. So the idea of finding purpose in suffering, right? But also this idea of, I'm gonna do good by somebody or do right by somebody who has definitely done wrong by me,
Yeah.
to the extent that I'm going to move my family to the other side of the country so that
Yeah.
they won't be destroyed as a consequence of their actions.
Yes.
Tell me about how your faith plays into that and informs that decision.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because you're right. In this society, it's like we get offended at anything. It's like, you don't like chocolate? You know, everybody likes chocolate. Whatever. We've become so hypersensitive to the stupidest things, quite frankly. What I heard one person say, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I think that's true. And so, at a very young age, I found faith and became a Christian at, I guess I was 16, 17. Yeah, I quit drinking by the time I was 16 or 17. So, and I just had a very short period of time there that I did. Um, but these things became really real, and it wasn't even because that's how I was raised. I was raised in this very super liberal theology, I guess, if you will, that was all about social causes, but it really had no meaning besides social or political causes. So it became a very personal thing for me, and it's been tested in the most severe ways. Um, but And I had presumptions along the way too, but, there is a verse that says, "A good name is to be valued above great riches." And and we can have people slander us and drag our name through the mud, and we can't do jack squat about it. But we have the choice and we have the power over two things: our attitude and our effort. That's it. That is all that we have control over. And it took me a long time to really embrace that. So this is, when you write a book at age 60, I'm 62. I guess I wrote it, yeah, 2 years ago is when I started it, I guess. Um, maybe three. And then I let it sit for a year while publishers were, kind of, I felt like I was getting strung along, but then I realized after somebody just got really honest, Gary, you don't have 1 million followers and we have to sell 10,000 books in the first week. Oh, That's how it works. Thank you for telling me. And then I felt kind of stuck until my wife said, spring the money and blow the 10,000 bucks to print it and get with a independent publisher to help me guide through that process, because it's like a foreign land, you don't really know what you're doing. And if you think that you're going to get rich off of it, no, you're not, I mean, but it was good. And I have never felt, and I've never responded well to somebody that was banging something over my head and saying, you will do this. That's capitulation. That's not free will. And so I wanted to be very careful about not preaching, if you will. It's just my experience, you can take it or leave it for whatever you want. I'm not forcing you any more than somebody forced me to become a Christian. Nobody forced me to I actually paid some high prices for becoming a Christian. So,
Yeah.
but it's my choice. So, um, but it's so integral to who I am. And again, like, I've been burned the most by people that theologically had their ducks in the same row as I did. I mean,
Mm.
I've lost over $1 million to people that said one thing and did another, which
Mm.
really fed into my purpose when I got really serious in '03. And I hadn't even been through the biggest trial of my life, which was in '08 and '09. So that was 5 and 6 years before that. Um, and it got tested really hard in '08 and '09 when everything blew up in our face. Um, but I wanted to make sure, like, hey, I don't want to just talk about it. I I want to know, did I make a positive difference in the lives of other people or not? I mean, if my wife and children who know me better than anybody would say, well, that's dad's or my husband's public persona, but if you only knew,
Mm.
then my life is a complete failure. Complete failure. So I don't want that. So,
Mm.
and I think that's part of the unmasking of this whole thing with imposter syndrome anyway. It's like at some point you just have to be you.
Yeah.
And if you can embrace that, I mean, that really is weapon number 6. It's, celebrate the anything but typical in yourself and other people.
Mm.
That means that you don't have to agree with me on everything or even many things for me to appreciate you.
Yeah.
We can vehemently disagree on certain things, but we can still have respect for somebody.
Mhm.
I have no idea where my eye surgeon is politically or philosophically or on anything else, but man, doggone it, he is a good eye surgeon. And I'm
Yeah.
glad he has that fine motor skills and that attention because I don't, you know. So, you know, I can
Yeah.
appreciate how he was uniquely created and what he loves to do because I wish I didn't need to know him. And I told him that. But when your retina detaches and you go blind in that eye, you want a guy like Dr. Tucker, so
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. Yeah. That's a good point that you make about not beating people over the head with the
yeah.
preaching side of things, but there's a difference, isn't there, between sharing your experience in
Yes.
a way that is potentially beneficial to others to
Yeah.
getting on a soapbox and preaching it. And one thing that impresses me about the book and the tone of the book, the way it's written, is that you are sharing your experience. You're sharing a story. So, yes, people can get the 7 weapons. They
Yeah.
don't have to convert to Christianity or
Right.
have your same values, but they can get these 7 weapons. They can use them in their particular context, in their particular
Yes.
situation, and they can benefit from them regardless of that. But
Yes.
you're talking about something more than just overcoming the imposter syndrome. You're talking about something that is sufficient to make a contribution to others through the life that you've lived, because the experiences that you share are a testament of your faith, like you say, that there's some people who they say one thing, and this is the thing. It's like when I read the New Testament, Christ is always talking about it's not what you say you're going to do, what you say you're
Yes.
about, it's what you actually do. Be ye
Yeah.
therefore doers of the word and not hearers only. So there's a lot of
Yes.
that. And for every person that does live the faith, so to speak, there are maybe many more. I don't know what the ratio is. I'm not even going to have a stab in the dark. But there are many others who don't do that and
Yeah.
espouse it. It can happen in Christianity, it can happen in other religions as well.
Yes, of course.
But I think it's really important to have examples, and again, in Christianity and in other faiths, of solid principles being put into practice, solid
Yeah.
principles being lived to good effect. Because my sense is that with the way that the world is, and like you say about people getting offended on everything, oh, well, you don't like chocolate, or you like
Yeah.
this and I don't like that, and well, how can you like this, blah, blah, all these opinions about
Yes.
everything that just don't really matter. We need these
Yeah.
examples of good principles in action so that people have something to ground themselves in, right? It's like you talk about
Yeah.
the seven weapons, but within the seven weapons, there are other principles that are intertwined that people
Oh,
can
yeah.
benefit from. What really struck me actually was on a personal level was, and I can't remember the particular situation that you were dealing with, because I remember listening to it and thinking, because I listened to it on Audible and thinking, when does this guy not have to deal with a situation? There's stuff
Yeah.
coming
I've
up left,
wondered
right,
that
and
many
center.
times.
Yeah, it's there's stuff coming here left, right, and center. But there was one particular situation you were in, and you said it was so bad that
Yeah.
you didn't even have the money to wind up the company, and
Yes.
the bad news just kept hitting you left, right, and center, day in,
Yes.
day out. And somebody said to you in the parking lot, Gary Frey, you
Yeah.
look like you're going to die, or something to that effect.
Yes.
And you
That's
wake up
right.
with night sweats every night. And then
Right.
somebody gave you a challenge, a faith-based challenge, because you're praying all
Yes.
the while here, right? Now, somebody might think, well, if you're praying
Yes.
all the while, well, you're a good Christian, you're praying. Why isn't your God helping you out? But you had to
Right.
go deeper than that. So tell us about how you took
Yeah.
your faith to the next level and to go beyond just the asking routine.
Yeah, that was the most earth-shattering experience we'd been through. It was um within like our company was starting to falter. So the '08, Great Recession hit in September 15. I remember coming off of a plane with our management team in this private equity firm, and the pilot said, "Man, the Dow just dropped 700 points today," or something like that. We're like, "What?" Now, the Dow at that point was running at what, 12,000, now it's at 40, something like that. And we're like, "What?" And so that was kind of the first salvo, but then we started feeling things, and then our CEO started getting very desperate. And right at that time, um, he got us into a deal where we were supposed to raise $30 million for a tower that was going to be built in, I think, Austin, Texas. And we had no business raising institutional money. We were a collection of about 300 families that were very wealthy, but not institutional money like, endowments and, Harvard endowments and that kind of stuff. That's where that kind of money gets raised. Well, there's nothing happening from September on because like the banks were calling notes all over the world. And I knew a guy personally that had $100 million in aircraft, his personal fleet of aircraft. He was supposedly the largest borrower from Bank of America, and they start calling notes on him because he's this massive developer, big developer. And he has to liquidate his aircraft of helicopters and Gulfstreams and all that kind of stuff. So the world is just blowing up. And then by June of '09, uh, a hostile creditor seized our bank accounts. Like they seized our bank accounts. And And we had had a series of other tremors that were happening within the company. But our CEO, and I didn't even talk about a lot of this because he's still alive. I thought I knew him well, and I thought he was one of my best friends, but he was a sociopath. I didn't even know what a sociopath was, but he had lied about everything. And so from the time that our bank accounts got seized, we had like 4 days to address it, or they were going to bankrupt us. And we didn't even have, I didn't even know this. We had to have $300,000. It was going to cost us $300,000 just to bankrupt the company. There's no money, there's no money to pay for any of us. And the CEO was faking a brain tumor. Like, you cannot make this stuff up. It was the craziest thing. And so, long story short, bank accounts get seized. I have to bring in the founder who was in retirement early, came back, and I said, you got to call the dogs off, with these guys. Then we had invested in 2 companies, 2 Ponzi's of all things. So I didn't even talk about the specifics, a lot of that stuff. It was just horrific. And so I had money in this, other people had money in this stuff, and we had gone way beyond and above and beyond the call of duty for due diligence based on the SEC and the regulating parties. But it didn't matter because Bernie Madoff had done his deed, and so they were looking for anybody that, so they were doing a big dragnet. So we were getting letters, weekly on how I could sue my broker. I was the broker, and people that had done this. And then we were getting other lawsuits, like they were just coming in all over the place. And so everybody's gone. The board of directors, 4-person board, says, Gary, stay in the ring with us. One of those guys kept me alive because I had 2 kids in college. I was wiped out immediately. Boom. My worth was, I had put so much money, too much, into this holding company. It's gone. $30 million worth of us are wiped out like overnight. But then I'm just having these night terrors because I realized, one, our CEO lied. We didn't even have errors and omissions or directors and officers insurance, E&O or D&O insurance, which protects you from that kind of stuff. None of it. So we were all just naked. We were just all naked. And so my prayer was, Lord, I know you can deliver me. Will you deliver me? Please deliver me. And that was just on repeat, millions of times a day. And that's all that went through my mind. And so for months, it was just getting worse and worse and worse. And I couldn't sleep. I would have at least 3 times a week these night terrors where I'd wake up in the middle of the night, usually 2 in the morning. I have no idea why 2 in the morning, but that's about when it was. I'd be drenched in sweat. My heartbeat, I'd check my pulse, it'd be at 140 beats a minute. And normally it was 39. And I felt like I was a Raggedy Ann doll in the mouth of a Rottweiler. And so I had scripture cards, I was memorizing, I was fasting, I was doing all of this stuff, everything that I knew to do, but it was like not working. Like, what is up? And so I called these 2 friends of mine in different parts of the country that have both been through fire. Like, they have both been through, really hard things. One with his wife dying, and the other one just like financial devastation, and both just men of intense integrity and deep faith. And I called them, and they don't even know each other. And I told them the same thing. Hey, I feel powerless against this fear when it comes rushing in. I don't know what to do. And I believe that God's word is true, that perfect love casts out fear, but why am I so powerless against this? And both of them said the same basic thing, which was, Gary, it's about surrender. Can you trust God even if he doesn't answer your prayer the way you want and he doesn't deliver you? Can you trust him even if your worst fears come upon you? Oh, that will challenge you. Because I had befriended a guy. He was working in the Einstein's bagel, like 30 paces from our office in this little village in Ohio, and he was a multimillionaire that was a brilliant day trader, and he had some big money guys in Cleveland, Ohio that put money with him, and he got behind and started falsifying returns. And these guys came after him with everything, and he got thrown into a maximum security prison. Should have never ever been there for 7 years. Lost everything. Kills a man in prison. Like, his stories will like curl your hair. So I'm hearing this from this dude, and I'm like, I'm on the management team of this company that blows up. We find out that the CEO lied about stuff. We invested in 2 Ponzi's. It's just like fear, fear, fear. And what was interesting is I took 2 days to just wrestle, and it just took me down to bedrock. It was like, all right, well, God, have you proven yourself throughout history? Not just my experience. I wanted to start with historical proof first. And we had read a book called by a guy named Gary Habermas, who is like the world's authority on the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus from a historical evidence and from historical record proof, not even using scripture. Well, that was pretty compelling. And so then I said, all right, well, if I had somebody put a gun to my head with a round in the chamber, cocked and ready to roll, and if they put it up to my forehead or my temple and said, we're going to blow your brains out if you don't recant your faith, do I have enough evidence in my life and experience where I would have to say, pull the trigger? And I did. There were a handful of times in my life where I could not explain certain miracles and certain answers to prayer and experiences that I just have to say, pull the trigger. So those two things combined, first the historical, but then my own evidence. And then I thought, okay, it's about surrender. I don't like this situation at all. It's terrifying. The risks are high. We'd already lost everything except for the house. But like, do I go to prison, with these people? Like, I don't know. And But it was all outside of my control. And that's when I started sleeping like a baby, like no more night terrors. And it got worse. Like, that was in August of 2009. And it really intensified up until like Christmas of that year. And people that we had invested money in federal pens, in penitentiaries, I still, the last one got out just about a year ago, and I get notified because I had money in it. Like, in the US, they have to notify you if you've been a victim of fraud like that. If they're moving a prisoner or whatever, you get notified. So it was just a reminder all the time. But to be able to sleep in the middle of that, pretty amazing. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
That's that reminds me of that scripture, and I'm terrible at remembering references and verses, but like when Christ says, "Peace I give unto you, my peace I leave with you, not as the world giveth,
yeah,
give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid."
trouble.
I'm ad-libbing that, so it's not perfect, but
Yes,
it
yeah,
is that otherworldly calm that you can get
yeah,
through Christ and through faith. And that's incredible. I have experienced that, and I'm not going to regale you with my stories as well, but I've had similar situations where there's been it's the powerlessness, isn't it? It's that
yes,
absolute powerlessness, and it can come to people as it has done with you in your situation. But there are so many variations of that powerlessness because we all care about things, whether
yes,
it's, of course, you don't
yes,
want to be in prison. You have your material wealth, you have your family. There's so many things that we care about. And then there are so many different situations where powerlessness can feature. And then having the faith to surrender and feeling that peace afterwards is irrational. It's it's so irrational that
Yes.
it makes you realize, or for me, it made me realize that rationality is simply not enough. If we
Yeah.
only rely on rationality, if we only rely on the prognosis or the outlook, we're done. We're done.
Yeah. You're
I
right.
would say that in my life, if I'd only relied on
You're right.
what looked like the trajectory was or what the experts might say about the situation, no, there's no hope, right? There's
Yes.
just
You're
no
right.
hope in the situation. But yet there is something that goes beyond all of this. There is something that transcends rationality. And I think in the world at large, we think we're so clever now. We were talking before this call started about things like ChatGPT and AI and
Yeah.
how clever that is. And we think we're so clever because we've created all these tools, but we're not that clever at all. There's so many things we don't know. Even with the aid of machines, there's so many things that we just don't
Yes.
know. And that surrender is necessary, subjugating the ego to something higher. Because this is what I find sometimes is when people don't do that,
Yes.
it's like, or people can believe or not believe what they want. So I'm not saying it like that, but I know in some cases, some extreme cases where people choose to follow a different path, it's almost like they end up deifying other people or they deify the ego.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's almost like they create other gods.
Yeah.
But the question then is, do these other gods have real power? Right? So, okay, you set this thing up or this idea or these people or yourself, you have faith in yourself, I'm gonna do it on my own or whatever. But is there real power in that? And that's the question. So a lot to think about, and that's why I love the book as well, Gary, because it is a how-to, and it does what it says on the tin. It will empower you to silence the imposter, but it does have all of these stories as well, without preaching at people or banging them over the head. It's just literally
Yeah.
your experience, your story, and I think that's another reason why I like it is because it resonates with where I am with this because I can't prove anything to anybody about
Yeah.
any degree of faith, and I don't think we're supposed to do. But what I can
Yeah.
do is I can tell you what happened. I can share my experiences. I can share you the stories that have happened to me. But also, like you say, we can control our attitude and our effort. Now,
That's it.
going through your book, right? Going through your book, you've had several bad experiences with people.
Yeah.
Yet, and you say this a few times in the book. There's a couple of times, and certainly you say it. I don't know whether it's midway through the book or in the body of the book, but you come back to it at the end of the book as well. That relationships trump everything for you. Relationships trump everything for you. How is
Yes.
that so? How are you not really suspicious of people and sort of bitter to people? How is it that instead of feeling this suspicion about people and people's motives, that you say relationships trump everything, and I'm going to drop a job interview, a potential job interview, or a really important meeting that might lead to a job when I really need a job for the sake of serving someone else? How is it that you choose other people when other people have done you so wrong in the past?
Oh, that's a good question. Um, I think part of it is realizing I'm just as capable of making the same stupid decisions like my embezzling partner. No, I'm just as capable of justifying a lie as the last CEO that caused so much devastation. I'm just as capable. And what I really have noticed, and it wasn't without tremendous struggle. Okay. I mean, these came with tremendous struggle, but at the end of the day, we get to choose to be bitter or we're going to be grateful. And it doesn't mean grateful for the situation or grateful for or even refuse to call it out. You can still call out truth and you can still do it lovingly, but it's still truth and it can still cut. Um, but gratitude transcends that. And I think I just go back to, well, God is a God of relationship. We broke relationship with him, not him breaking it with us repeatedly. over and over and over and over again. I mean, all you got to do is read Jeremiah and the weeping prophet. And I used to think, oh man, God is mad. I mean, yeah, he was, but he was weeping over these people that were just incessant about going their own way and just completely snubbing a God that really wanted relationship. And I think that's how we're designed. I mean, we were not created to be alone. Weapon number one, right? And so one of the things that I noticed, especially in that really dark time of 2009, is I would look at the Psalms and I'd look at David. He would cry out, and many times he would be asking for God to smack his enemies. But he would be in his despair, and then he would say, but I remember your goodness. I remember and recall the your deeds of old. Mm. There's a powerful thing about remembering and giving thanks. And then he says, but giving thanks, and this is what God says in Psalm, he says, but giving thanks is a sacrifice that truly honors me. Mm. If God says that he is honored, and he knows, like we see at our best dimly, dimly. um, look at what we've seen with the Webb telescope. Like, it's opened up expanses of the horizon, like of the universe that we thought were just black holes. And the Hubble telescope before that, but the Webb is just like mind blowing. And then you go down to the most microscopic atomic level of things that people didn't know about 100 years ago. They were still there. He knows that we see dimly. And yet he says, but giving thanks is a sacrifice that truly honors me. There are times that it feels like a sacrifice to say thank you in the midst of the tears. We don't have to deny our present reality and difficulty and hurt and disillusionment. We don't have to deny that. He never said to do that. He never sanitized the word and like, oh, well, David, that thing with Bathsheba, we're going to just cut that part out of history. He didn't do that. Exposed, but he also showed the ramifications of bad choices, but also grace and mercy for repentant hearts, for people that were willing to humble themselves. So in the midst of all these crazy things that I've seen and these crushing things, but like gratitude, that's weapon number 5, and it's not like number 5 is like perfect. It's the number of grace, right? Just writing down what you're grateful for every day and following it by a thought or a prayer 3 times. Like that's so simple. But man, there's proof now that we're seeing that it actually does affect our brain. There's a
Mm.
neuroplasticity effect of that. Oh, the wisdom of God, But again, we don't have to um, like putting your head in the sand and saying, oh, it's not cloudy outside, it's sunny. Well, it's cloudy right now. I'm seeing clouds, but there's sun above it. you know
Yeah, yeah,
call it for what it is.
absolutely.
It's
Absolutely.
liberating.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your point there as well. You say about how the biblical narrative isn't sanitized, it isn't whitewashed. And like David's
No.
errors are there to see. And he wrote the Psalms, he wrote a lot of the Psalms, as I understand it. And they are powerful. They're powerful forms of solace. They are very introspective, but they're very much about man's struggle with God, man's
Yeah.
wrestling with God as well. And that's the messiness of it. That's the messiness of life. So all these ideas about trying to
Yes.
sanitize things and make everything safe defy the human experience. They defy the nature
Yeah.
of humanity.
Yeah.
I've got one last question I'd like to ask Gary, and
Yeah.
I'm mulling over how to ask it. But what do you think God thinks about silencing the imposter?
That's a good question. Um, Here's what I think. I think he abhors lies because lies, he said that the devil is the father of lies. And the imposter syndrome and this whole, it's really about lies. So I think he actually wants to punch it in the mouth too, because they're lies. You know, why did I have to feel like I was less than just because I sucked at playing baseball, or I was an awkward athlete as a young kid, or my dad drug a leg through life because he lost a leg at 17 to polio. And I always felt less than when you see people staring at you as you're walking down the street. Those are lies. I mean, like, okay, that's my experience, but I'm still valuable. My dad was still valuable. So that's how I would say. I don't know because, like, but that's my gut, how he, because it's true that he hates lies.
I love that answer. It's not what I was expecting to say at all, but I think it is accurate at a fundamental level because fundamentally, as you've identified in the book, the imposter is a liar, essentially.
Yeah.
And nobody can make a real contribution if they are being misdirected or inhibited and held back by the liar that is the imposter.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Gary, this has been a great conversation and it's gone in a direction that I didn't necessarily expect it to. I've gone through the whole book. Like I say, I had several different things to talk about. I think it's gone the place that it was supposed to go. I think we've ended up in the place that we were supposed to end up for the value that we can extract from this for now and really put forward in terms of the essence of the book. I highly recommend it. I think it's great. I listened to it on Audible and it's a very, very good listen. I can imagine it being a great read as well. It sounds like, for me, when I was listening to it, it sounded like you were right there. I know we've never spoken before in person. We've been connected on LinkedIn for a little while, but I felt like I knew you
Yeah.
by the end of it and I'd gained from it absolutely. So anybody can benefit from it, whether religious or not. Like I say, you give people the seven weapons, silence the imposter, and it will work for anybody, regardless of what they believe, what they don't believe. How can they
Yes.
get it, Gary? How's the best way for them to get hold of it?
So it's on Amazon. That's the only place that it's at, and so it's available on as a paperback, and so it's all print on demand. It's 160 pages. It'll take you 2 to 2.5 hours to read it. The Audible is, I think, about 3.5 hours, and then it's also on Kindle. So Amazon is kind of the 800-pound gorilla for book distribution, period. And then, when you're with an independent publisher like I am, um, that's kind of the way to roll. So,
Yeah.
and it's not that I'm going to get rich off it. I make $6 on a $15 book. So, um, but and you know what? I wouldn't have spent the money. I don't think I would have had my wife not been the one that said, Gary, just spend the money. Um, you
Mm.
know, and we don't spend a lot of money on ourselves. We don't live a lavish lifestyle. And to throw out, I think it was about 13 grand by the time it was all said and done with the audio book and all that. And she's a very private person. And so her reading this book, it took her a long time before she would even read it because it's so painful. I mean, there's just
Mm.
it takes her right back.
Yeah.
The way I liken it is we were going down Pikes Peak and our brakes went out, but I've at least got the
Mm.
steering wheel. She's holding on for dear life through
Yeah.
all of this. Like, hey, and it's a real,
Yeah.
experience if you go off the side of a mountain, but at least I had the wheel and I was
Mm.
white knuckled as well. But for her, And for our spouses that go through this stuff with us, they are extremely powerless because
Yes.
they are relying upon us. And so for her to say, just do it, that means a lot to me. And So, and it also, I've got a son that I've got two sons, and one of them, and I'm proud of both of them. But my youngest son owns a shoe company. He was a designer for Reebok, and then
Mm,
he started his own company called Flux Footwear. And I've got 62, reviews on Amazon currently, and the one that means the most is from him
mm,
because he lived it too,
yeah.
and he saw. And if he would have said, he could have just not written a review, or if he would have said, yeah, if he would have been honest and said, "Oh well, my dad says this, but he's actually lives a completely different life," man, you know, that's the worst thing that could ever happen, as far as I'm concerned. If I was living a double life, but for him to say, I've seen him.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. That's the sign of nobody can ever say themselves that they have integrity. I find it tends to be, people that go on and on about integrity. Why do you keep talking about it, But you can only really be sure of that from what someone else says. You can only really be sure
Yeah,
from someone else's endorsement who sees the
who
private and the
really
public.
knows.
Exactly, who sees the
Yes,
private and the
who
public. So
really knows.
what better testimonial than that? I love that point you make as well about the spouses. Yeah, they're the ones who are really powerless because
Yeah,
they they're just having faith and hope that things are going to work out without having any grip on the wheel at all, really. So I
yeah,
love that. There's so much to draw from that, but I think the supreme power of choice is key to this as well, and how we choose to respond to
yeah,
these things. Are we going to be bitter about them, or are we going to have gratitude for what we've gained from them, and then seek to use that to serve others? I think that's the key. I think that is really the key is making sense of these things in a way that leads to empowerment, to growth, instead of resentment. Resentment leads to decline. It leads to
yes,
malevolence. It leads to death. Death of, and I'm not talking about like literal death, but death of opportunities, death of relationships,
yes,
death of goodness in life. And it just doesn't lead to a good place. It might
no,
feel natural, but there's this you've mentioned the Old Testament a few times actually, and there is something in the Old Testament that's mentioned at least twice. I think in Proverbs and in Psalms, there's a phrase that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I think that's what it comes down to. Is actually,
that
and it doesn't mean
that
like just
it
be
is.
trembling in your, yeah, it doesn't mean to be trembling in your boots about God and like, oh no, I don't want to get struck by a bolt of lightning. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about respecting, having deference to God over man and man's ways of seeing things, that God's ways of doing things, his principles, the commandments that we're given are there for our benefit. They're not there to
Right.
gratify a man in the sky. This is about us and about our opportunity to learn, to grow, to develop, to become on this earth. So there's so much there. And you refer to parts of your story in the book as an adventure. I think the whole thing is an adventure. And like you say, there's parts of
Yes.
it that you just sometimes you think, I wish that hadn't have happened. And then there's other times you look at it and you think, well, if it didn't happen, then what would have come after that point in time?
Right.
And we just don't know. We don't know because we don't, as vast as the universe is, we don't live in a parallel universe. We can't hop over to a parallel universe and see what would have happened instead.
Yeah.
We just have to trust. We just have to trust the process and find the best possible meaning. Tell the best story that we can. I think even if you don't want to get into a religious framework or paradigm with it, one thing I would say to people who might not want to adopt a religious outlook on this is tell
Yeah.
the best story about it that you can. Tell the best
Yeah.
story about it as you can. Find the meaning of it in the best way that you can. And I think
Yeah.
that is a start, at least in terms of choosing to be grateful instead of choosing to be bitter.
It's a wrestling match. I mean, it's easy to look back on 62 years of life now and see the
Mm,
patterns.
for
When
sure.
you're in the midst of it,
Yeah.
and man, I wrestled with bitterness with my partner's embezzlement. I wrestled when I came to Charlotte and a guy swindled me out of 30 grand and I brought a $2 million account to him. I mean, that I wrestled really like that 30 grand was worth more to me than the hundreds of thousands of dollars that I'd forgiven with my partner in Kansas because we
Mm,
were on fumes like, and I
mm,
got dirty badly by this guy. And then but it was eating me alive. It was literally just eating me with bitterness. Anytime I would see a green Bonneville, which is what he drove, and he lived only about a mile from us, anytime I see it, man, my heart rate would just go boom. I could feel my blood pressure just sky.
mm,
And I wrestled with it for a long time. And I was completely in the right. I had documents that, and I decided I'm going to sue him because we were on like fumes. And I dropped the lawsuit and it took me about 18 months to pay my attorney,
mm,
to get paid what this guy owed me. Um, but it was because bitterness was eating me alive. And so
mm,
I took him a note and he looked at me like, a ghost had arrived at his doorstep. And he was a magistrate at one point, besides
mm.
before he was business owner. So he knew the law, and I knew I had 2 years of statute of limitations, but I put it in writing. I'm dropping the suit. I don't know how to pay this guy. I didn't have a job. Um, and but the bitterness is killing me, and my response to you has been wrong. Would you please forgive me? And what you did was wrong as well, but I'm not demanding that you ask for forgiveness. I'm asking you to forgive me for my bad attitude. I still wrestled, and then guess what? Our kids got thrown on the same soccer team, travel soccer team. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
And and so years have gone by. He asked to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm kind of like, nah, I'm good. I don't have to. I forgive him, but
Yeah.
I don't need to hang out with him.
Sure.
And,
Sure.
I'm not going to connect with him on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a wrestle. I mean, it was a wrestling match. So none of this is easy. Simple doesn't mean easy. It's
No.
simple. Forgive. It
Yes.
doesn't mean it's
Exactly. It's understood. It's easy to understand, but it's difficult to execute. That's
yes.
that's the thing. And that's and again, it does come back to faith, doesn't it? Because like you say, and I'm glad you raised that because it isn't like some magic switch. It's not just a one and done.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's not a one and done decision. It's a process of getting there. It's having the intention. Sometimes it's moving forward and having the intention.
Yes.
I have the intention to have gratitude in my heart. I have the intention to forgive. How can I do that? And it's finding that, it's that wrestle with God. It's finding out how to do that as well from the sources of
Yes.
wisdom at your disposal in your environment, but having the intention is so much in life. I think there is that saying that attitude is everything. I think it's very much about intention. It's very much about what do you want? What do you want to achieve?
Yeah.
Who do you want to become? Where do you want to be? Where do you want to arrive at, so to speak? And what is your vision for the future? I think that is a great way of looking at it, and that can help us to transcend the things that in the moment they feel good or they feel right. That anger, yeah, I'm right to be angry, but you've got to let it go. I've had experiences with people in a professional
Yes.
setting that have let me down or done me wrong,
Yes.
but I've never felt so liberated as when I've been able to forgive and do
Yes.
something like you wrote the note to the guy. I've had experiences where I've not necessarily written a note to them, but I've done something which shows it's okay. It's
Yeah.
I've moved on, and it's not as explicit as what happened to you, and I've not been as explicit in saying I forgive you, but there's been something there just to say it's okay.
Yeah.
I've put it
Right.
down, and when you put it down, you feel fantastic, and yet nothing has happened except for that shift in attitude. But that
Yeah.
small thing is it's what I call little big thing. It's a little
Yeah.
thing, but it's absolutely huge.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well put. Well put. This has been so much fun, Tom.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's I have this internal dialogue that goes on about the podcast in terms of how to do these things, structure versus chaos, order versus chaos. And I'm
Yes.
I'm very I do like my structure, I like process, but I'm quite creative in my own right as well. So I do like that bit of chaos. And with this, I thought, okay, well, let's prepare what we want to talk about, do all the preparation, but actually let's allow there to be a dancing star in there as well to take us where we need to go. And that is beyond me in terms of I say where it needs to go,
Yeah.
where it's supposed to. I don't know what that is exactly. I just know that when you talk with authenticity, with honesty and openness, then things can find their own way. And I think that's what's happened today. So this has been great. For me personally, this has been such an awesome supplement to your book. I highly recommend that people get hold of the book, whether it is on Audible, whether it is on the paper copy, because even if you have it just as a reference point, there are things that you can pull out of there of these 7 weapons that could help you at any given time. So thank you, Gary, for the book. Thank you for your
Yeah.
time today on the Real Clear Values podcast.
Thank you, Tom. This It was a lot of fun.